This is the story of Helen of Troy, Achilles, Troy, Greece, Hector, Paris, Amagi, Don Briseidis, Helen, a woman rewarded and punished by the gods with a gift as unique and virtuous as it is cursed and terrible. An incomparable beauty capable of provoking the best madness in men, but also the worst sanity, daughter of a god, wife of kings. Loved and hated by all, Helena lived from a young age and forever, subjected to the scrutiny of friends and enemies, just for being who, for being what she is, for having the face that will cause one of the most famous and legendary wars in the history of humanity and the Trojan War. Revenge, desire, anger, jealousy, love, death and loneliness plagued the life of a woman, a character who, in a terrible paradox, he embodies in his beauty the unhappiness of the monster, the loneliness of Cerisol or Schopenhauer. He said that beauty is a letter of recommendation that wins our hearts in advance, but it can also bring misfortune and calamity. In the cradle of Western civilization was born one of the most famous women in myths, legends and universal culture. Her name is synonymous with unparalleled beauty like war, evoking the envy of powerful goddesses and the desires of ambitious kings. Helen, on the night of betrayal and mystery, fell into the arms of the newcomer and fled over the sleeping sea, shaking the foundations of the empire. Adultery was tragic and fatal, for the victim was no longer the husband, but the insatiable torrent of death that turned Troy into an immense graveyard. The elders of the kingdom protested the extreme and acute situation of a woman they had never seen. When she appeared, they admired her so much that their doubt vanished at once and they accepted the war they opposed. Soon news arrives in Troy that there is a woman whose beauty inflames human hearts like divine fire, moved by her tragic fate that will mark him from his birth. Paris must fulfill an embassy in Sparta, and so she gathers the fatal squad and crosses the seas in search of her destiny. At the Spartan court, Menelaus receives the foreigner with all the honors due to one Hesperi lustrous. Paris showers Helena with rich gifts, necklaces, precious stones, gold bracelets, delicate and courteous linen garments, and ends up convincing Helena. At first, she still refuses to accept that love. He doesn't want to betray Menelaus. Then he realizes that his heart has already betrayed him, that the body is only an instrument of desire that lives in him like an unbearable martyrdom. The next day, the lovers must flee, simulating a kidnapping that will be heard about for centuries. They want to spare Menelaus the great pain of knowing that his wife consented to continue abroad. The harbor road is clear for the fugitives. Seeing the bold blue sea that awaits them to the point of remorse, he abandons them, since he intends to live the love that unites them without bitterness. It is not entirely clear what role Helena played during the war. It seems that he spent the day in the tower of Troy's palace, where he had a loom with which he weaved all his misfortunes. Meanwhile, he regretted the moment when he had had the weakness to listen to a stranger and leave with him. When Paris died, she married Deiphobus, who was also a son of Clamus like Paris, and when Troy was taken, Helen handed over Deiphobus in the most unworthy manner to the Greeks who stabbed him. In this way, Helen intended to reconcile herself with Menelaus and did so. The son of this atheist took her with him to Greece on a complicated trip because the gods caused several storms that made them pass through Cyprus, France and Egypt. Already in Sparta they were very happy until the early death of Menelaus. Then she was expelled from the Peloponnese by Indigna and headed to Rhodes on a journey. The queen received her and showered her with attentions upon her arrival. But the next day he ordered her to be drowned in the bathroom and hung from a gallows. The myth of the Iliad, the Trojan War brought to film in the most atheistic way possible. There are no gods or immortality here, but if we have an estimate of the great epicity of this war and its heroes who participated, so is Troy with a perfect Brad Pitt as Achilles. Let's start. You're listening to Moriki Pick Films and Black Dreams Films. Agamemnon, the king of all Greece, has conquered all the kingdoms that surround him. In the beginning, before a fight against the kingdom of Thessaly, he proposes to his enemy to resolve everything with a duel between the best soldier on each side. Thessaly calls for his champion and Agamemnon calls for his Achilles, but he is not on the battlefield, so he sends for him. A child is going to call him. She wakes him up and asks him to come to the call. Achilles is the fiercest soldier in all of Greece. He has found no rival, and in his life there is no better triumph than that of his name remaining as the greatest legacy of all. Achilles arrives on the battlefield, but does not get along with Agamemnon, does not respect his authority, and is about to abandon. He's convinced that if he wins that battle with a single death, his name would become legend. Here he accepts them, and, despite the attempts of his rival, finishes them with a single movement. Putting an end to that conquest, we move to the ports of Sparta. His king Menelaus has just sealed peace between his kingdom and that of Troy, having as guests his princess Hector, a great warrior, and his brother Paris, a heartbreaker who in the middle of Menelaus's banquet goes to the apartments of his queen Helen of Sparta. He falls in love with her and convinces her to run away with him to Troy and run from her abusive husband. And halfway there, Paris reveals to Hector what he did. Hector is aware of the consequences of Paris's action. He has just provoked a conflict between two nations or something more serious, but his brother says he is in love. Hector scolds him and says that Menelaus will not be very happy to know that his wife has just been stolen, and he is absolutely right. Menelaus goes to his brother Agamemnon to ask him to accompany him to claim his wife and almost catch up with those who insulted his honor. Agamemnon agrees, but secretly. He knows that this event is the excuse he was so looking for to conquer Troy and dominate the entire Aegean, and he will lead the greatest army known to great champions. But he needs someone from Achilles who won't even accept him as his king. His ferocity in battle will be key to his conquest. To convince Achilles to participate, King Odysseus meets with him. Ulysses, in case his refusal was the first occasion, convinces him, telling him that this battle will be the greatest of all and that they will forever remember the beings who participated in it. Achilles goes to see his mother and she gives him a prophecy. If he stays, he'll have a family, he'll be happy, but his name will be forgotten with the passage of time. But if he participates in Troy, he will die, but his name will be immortalized. And so they set off in the largest fleet ever seen. Hector, Paris and Helen arrive in Troy and are received by their father, Priam, king of Troy, and their cousin Briseida, priestess of Apollo. Hector asks his father to return Helena, who is about to embark on a war. But Priam believes more in his gods and the strength of his walls. So he leaves everything in his hands. They reinforce the beaches and pray to their gods and finally see the Greeks approaching. Hector takes his army and goes to meet them, while in the Greek fleet here he prevents his cousin Patroclus from engaging in combat, and he also takes the lead. And along with their Myrmidones, the strongest warriors in Greece will be the first to start the battle. They inspire the soldiers and even Ajax, a strong warrior, and they rush to take the beach. Hector arrives at the scene of the battle, divides his troops and heads in the direction of the temple of Apollo, where Achilles and the Myrmidons headed. All his soldiers are killed, and here he lets Hector escape, assuring him that they will already have their meeting. After the victory, Achilles has a dispute with Agamemnon. He refuses to obey his orders and dares to take the loot of the temple and its priestess Briseida, who also won the sympathy of Achilles. For this action he refuses to fight and withdraws his Myrmidones. Priam has already entered Olivera Agamemnon, who assures him that the gods are on his side, but Hector is more skeptical, which causes division in the council. After the victory, Achilles argues with Agamemnon. He refuses his orders and keeps the loot of the temple and the priestess Brise, who has won his sympathy. Here he takes away their myrmidons. "I'll be right in." Priam trusts the priests, but the skeptical Hector divides the council. Helena's escape attempt fails when she is told that Paris will come looking for her, indicating that it is more political than romantic. Priam gives Paris the sword of Troy for combat. Troops position themselves at the gates, while Priam and Helen watch Agamemnon's army approach. Here he remains absent, which leaves Patroclus unsatisfied. Both armies are closing in. Hector and Paris go out to talk to Agamemnon, Menelaus and the rest of the kings. Paris proposes a duel between him and Menelaus for Helena, and to put an end to this conflict, in the face of Hector's refusal, the duel occurs. But Menelaus is superior, subdues the boy with ease, and he flees cowardly at the feet of his brother, who attacks and kills the Spartan king, and the battle begins. But surprisingly, the Greeks are losing. The archers attack them from the top of the wall, and Hector, with difficulty, eliminates Jazz. And in the face of such a massacre, Odysseus convinces Agamemnon to withdraw his troops, and thus this first assault wins Troy. Agamemnon is desperate. He needs Achilles as he saves Briseis from some soldiers and takes her to his camp. She manages to have an effect on the feelings of the warriors, and even more so in the night. Even though she tried to kill him, they end up falling in love, which is weird because she's supposed to be a priestess and dedicated her life and punished to her god. But hey, it doesn't matter. Here love has found them. Now he intends to leave, but Patroclus reprimands them, but he doesn't care. He's already inside. The priests and generals agree to attack immediately, but Hector says there is no need. The Greek army is already destabilized, but Priam once again trusts his priests and orders the attack to be carried out. At night they throw fireballs to cause disorder in the camp, and at dawn, under the direction of Hector, the counter-offensive begins, but here they reach the camp, and their arrival inspires the soldiers, who are trapped between Greeks and Trojans. Hector and Achilles fight, but Hector finishes off Achilles, leaving all the Greeks stunned, but taking the helmet off the one he had killed. It was Patroclus who fooled everyone by wearing the armor of Achilles, and in such a scenario both armies retreat and back to Troy. Hector shows his wife a secret exit in case the city falls, and Paris trains with the bow and arrow. This does occur in the myth. Only from the actor it seems that it is a variant of Legolas. Achilles learns of his cousin's death and fires him, and the next morning he prepares to go for revenge. And Hector does the same, predicting his fate. And just when I feared, Achilles arrives at the walls. Hector says goodbye to his father, his brother, his wife and his son, and sees Helena for the last time. It is the face that sent thousands of ships beyond and into and out of the walls to confront his enemy. Combat requires effort from both warriors. Hector loses ground, Achilles breaks his defense, wounds him and kills him. He then ties Hector's body to his chariot and drags it before Priam's eyes. Later, Priam visits Achilles' shop in search of his son's body for a proper burial. He pays his respects and pleads, and finally convinces Achilles to return Hector's body along with Briseis. Priam manages to convince Achilles to return his body, and Briseis returns the body back to him. In Troy, the whole people say goodbye to who was their greatest warrior, and in the camp Odysseus comes up with the best idea, and here he sends his soldiers home. Days later, Priam and his leaders find a marvel, a large wooden horse. They believe the gods have punished the Greeks with the plague. They fled and left an offering to the gods. Paris asks to be burned, but again Priam listens to his priests and makes the worst mistake of his life. Bring the horse into town. Everyone celebrates, believing that they have obtained victory. What they don't know is that the Greeks haven't actually escaped. A group of soldiers hid inside the horse so they could open the doors and let the army in. Among them is Achilles, but for other purposes, and in a quick movement and by order of Odysseus, the gates are opened and the Greek troops enter, beginning the final fight against the Trojans. Agamemnon has won the victory and Priam watches helplessly how easily he was fooled. Hector's wife leads a group of people through the secret passage to escape. Helena accompanies them and Paris stays to look for Briseida. Not without first handing the sword of Troy to a boy so that his people still have a future. The Greeks have no limits. They enter and destroy the statues that represented Priam's blind faith in their diocese. He is finished off by Agamemnon. Faced with this scenario, Briseida, who was praying to her god, is grabbed by Agamemnon, but in an unexpected movement, she stabs the king, causing his death and before dying. She is rescued by Achilles, who intends to save her from the city, but at that moment she arrives in Paris, who believes Briseida is in danger, points and runs through Achilles' heel, his weak point, which in the myth makes sense because it was the only part of him that wasn't immortal, but in this atheist movie it only hurts him and arrow after arrow takes down the hero. Paris takes Briseida and they flee the city. The soldiers find the corpse of their champion and in the morning they celebrate his funeral. Odysseus says goodbye to his companion and, as the prophecy said, Achilles died in Troy, but in return his name will never be forgotten. The Trojan War is one of the most famous conflicts in human history, but it lies somewhere in the space between reality and fiction. The myth is as much part of the story as the real story. In this video we will explore one of the most famous stories, the Trojan War of all time. This epic war was fought between the Greeks and the Trojans over the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen. How did this war begin? Who were the heroes and villains? What lessons can we learn from this ancient story of love, betrayal and revenge to answer these questions? We will base ourselves on the oldest and most authoritative source of the Trojan War, the Iliad, an epic poem composed by Homer around the 8th century. Homer makes. He is widely considered the father of Western literature, and his poems have influenced countless writers and thinkers throughout history. The Iliad tells the story of the last year of the war, focusing on the exploits and fates of two legendary warriors, Achilles and Hector. But before we dive into the Iliad, let's set the stage for war. Troy was a rich and powerful city-state, located in what is now Turkey, across the Greek Sea. His royal family was descended from the gods and included King Priam, Queen Hecuba, Prince Hector, Princess Cassandra and Prince Paris. Paris was a handsome and charming prince, but also a coward and a troublemaker. One day he was invited to a wedding party on Mount Olympus, home of the gods. There she was asked to be a judge in a beauty contest between three goddesses, Herod, Athena and Aphrodite. Every goddess offered him a bribe. Herod promised him power, Athena promised him wisdom, and Aphrodite promised him the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite and she revealed to him that the woman he wanted was Helen, queen of Sparta and wife of Menelaus, a powerful Greek king. Paris then sailed to Sparta, where he was received by Menelaus as a guest. But while Menelaus was away, Paris seduced Helen and convinced her to elope with him. He also stole some of Menelaus's treasures and sailed back to Troy with Helen. This was a grave insult and a violation of the sacred laws of hospitality. Menelaus was furious and swore to avenge his honor. He asked his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and leader of the Greeks, to help him wage war against Troy and recover his wife. Agamemnon agreed and summoned the greatest heroes of Greece to join the expedition. Among them was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, and the most intelligent of men Dionysus, king of Argos and brave warrior, Nestor, king of Pylos and wise, counselor Argops, king of Salamis and mighty warrior, and Achilles, son of a mortal king and a goddess of the sea and the best of all the Greeks. Achilles was invincible in battle, except for his heel, which was his only weak point. The Greeks assembled a huge fleet of over 1,000 ships and set sail for Troy, but faced many obstacles along the way, including storms, monsters and the wrath of the gods. The gods were divided by war, as some favored the Greeks and others the Trojans. Herod and Athena supported the Greeks because they were angry with Paris for choosing Aphrodite. Aphrodite and Apollo supported the Trojans because they were their relatives. Zeus, the king of the gods, tried to remain neutral, but often intervened to balance the scales. Ars, the god of war, joined the Trojans because he loved bloodshed and chaos. The Greeks faced a major obstacle, Artemis, the goddess of the hunt and the moon. Agamemnon's murder of her sacred animal provoked her anger, stopping the winds and the Greek fleet to appease her. Agamemnon performed the heartbreaking sacrifice of his daughter Iphigenia. After nearly a decade of travel and battles, the Greeks arrived in Troy, a city fortified by imposing walls and brave warriors led by Hector, Priam's eldest son. The war that followed, which lasted another decade, was marked by numerous battles and casualties on both sides. Attempts by the Greeks to penetrate the walls of Troy were thwarted. Like the Trojans' efforts to push the Greeks off their ships, the war seemed stalled. A crucial moment in the war was the duel between Paris and Menelaus, who agreed to fight for Helen, and the winner claimed her as his wife, ending the war. However, Paris was no match for Menelaus and would have been murdered had it not been for the intervention of Aphrodite. She took him to a safe place and reunited him with Helen. The failed duel meant the continuation of the war. The war took another turn with a dispute between Agamemnon and Achilles. Agamemnon, forced to give up his prized Crusader to appease Apollo, demanded from Achilles' slave Crusader as compensation Achilles' refusal and subsequent withdrawal from the war, along with his plea to her mother Thetis. To convince Zeus that he will help the Trojans, they dealt a severe blow to Greek morale. The Trojans, strengthened, launched an assault on the Greek ships led by Hector. He killed many Greeks, among them Protesilaus, the first Greek to set foot on Trojan soil, and Patroclus, Achilles' closest friend. Patroclus, disguised as Achilles in an attempt to intimidate the Trojans and protect the ships, he was recognized and murdered by Hector, who claimed Achilles' armor as his trophy. Patroclus' death was the catalyst for Achilles' return to war. Overwhelmed by grief and anger, he swore to avenge his friend armed with a new and superior armor that Hephaestus had given him. He returned to the battlefield and annihilated the Trojans until he faced Hector. In their epic duel, Achilles' speed and strength prevailed. He killed Hector, tied his body to his chariot and disgraced him by dragging him over the walls of Troy. This marked another turning point in the Trojan War. The Trojan War was marked by the death of Hector, leaving his father Priam in despair. In a desperate act, Priam pleaded with Achilles, the murderer of his son. Returning Hector's body to him invoked the shared experience of fatherhood, which awakened Achilles' empathy. Achilles, moved by Priam's plea, returned Hector's body and allowed a truce for the funeral. However, the war was far from over. Achilles, despite his invincibility, had a weakness, his heel, Paris, the instigator of war. He exploited this vulnerability with an arrow guided by Apollo that caused the death of Achilles. His death was an important loss for the Greeks, who honored him with a grand funeral. However, the Greeks still had their most cunning hero, Odysseus, who devised a plan to end the war using a giant wooden horse in which he hid elite warriors. The horse was abandoned outside Troy as a supposed peace offering. Otherwise, a spy posing as a deserter convinced the Trojans to take the horse to the city, warning them not to damage it to avoid Athena's wrath. This cunning ruse marked the beginning of the end for Troy. The Trojans, tired of war, accepted the gift of the Greeks, a horse not knowing that it contained a lethal weapon. They celebrated their apparent victory and left the horse in the town square. When night fell and the city fell asleep, the Greeks, who were hiding inside the horse, appeared and opened the gates of the city to their army. The Greeks decimated Troy, murdered King Priam, his bloodline and Hector's son Astyanax, enslaved women, including the prophetic Cassandra. And they got Helena back. The fall of Troy marked the brutal end of a protracted war and marked a crucial moment in ancient history, as it heralded the decline of Bronze Age civilizations and the rise of Iron Age ones. This war inspired numerous versions, notably Homer's Odyssey, which chronicles Odysseus' journey after the war, and Virgil's Aeneid, narrating the flight and founding of Rome by the Trojan prince Aeneas. The Trojan War teaches many lessons about the art of power in the modern world. It demonstrates how passion and pride can lead to war and ruin, while cunning and courage can triumph. It also shows the influence of gods and fate on human affairs, and how individuals can defy or accept their destiny. It also shows how power can be a double-edged sword, as it can bring glory and honor, but also pain and sadness. The Trojan War is a timeless and universal story about the human condition and the human spirit. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, like it, share it and subscribe. Mauri que pic films, videos, peos, cats y música.